Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another movie with us?
Always up for a good deep dive.
This time, we're taking on Underworld. Evolution. Think you've got those silver nitrate bullets loaded.
You know I do. Always come prepared.
Awesome. So, for anyone just joining us, whether you're prepping for a rewatch, venturing into the Underworld series for the first time, or just curious about all the hype, we're about to break down a single movie review and unearth some fascinating insights about this sequel.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we begin?
Well, the review tackles a lot, from the origins of those iconic vampires and Lycans to the themes of family betrayal and forbidden love.
Oh yeah, gotta have that forbidden love. Vampires, werewolves, and romance. What's not to love?
Right. But the big question, of course, is does evolution live up to the legacy of the first Underworld?
That's always the challenge with sequels, isn't it?
Yeah.
Building on what came before, but also bringing something new to the table.
Exactly. So let's quickly set the stage. The movie picks up right where the first one left off. Selene and Michael, our favorite vampire hybrid couple, are on the run.
Running from what exactly?
Well, their journey ends up uncovering some ancient secrets about the war between the vampires. They're called death dealers, by the way. And the Lycans.
Ah, so we're going even deeper into the lore this time around.
That's what the review says. It actually praises the movie for its ambition in diving deeper into all that history and backstory. But there's always a but, isn't there?
Uh-huh, right. What's the catch?
The review warns that things get a little, how do they put it? Yes, convoluted.
Convoluted, huh?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a plot that really twists and turns.
It seems that way. Which makes me wonder, how does that convoluted aspect hit you, the viewer? Do you think a complex plot enhances a movie like this? Or does it become too much to handle?
It really depends on what you're looking for in a film, doesn't it?
Huh.
Some people love a good puzzle. Others prefer a more straightforward narrative. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think I lean towards enjoying a good puzzle as long as all the pieces fit together in the end. But speaking of things that might hook you in, the review also mentions family, betrayal, and forbidden love.
Ooh, sounds juicy. Is that where the evolution comes in? Are we talking about evolution of the characters or evolution of the whole vampire-Lycan conflict?
That's a good question. The review doesn't explicitly say, but it does hint that those themes, those really intense themes, might get a little lost in the midst of all the action.
Ah, so maybe the focus is more on the spectacle, the big fight scenes, and less on those character-driven elements.
Maybe. It makes you wonder, what's the real heart of a movie like this? Is it the complex world building or the emotional journeys of the characters?
Right. Do you need both for a movie to truly succeed? Or can a film like this get away with leaning more heavily on one element over the other?
I think for me, it's about striking that balance, I love to be visually wowed, but I also need a story that keeps me engaged emotionally. What about you?
I'm with you on that. Give me both.
Okay, good. So let's talk about the actors who bring these characters to life. The review specifically praises Kate Beckinsale's performance as Selene. Do you think she truly commands the screen in this one?
Oh, absolutely. Beckinsale is fantastic as Selene. She brings this incredible mix of strength and vulnerability to the role.
Right. She's not just a badass vampire warrior. She actually has, layers to her.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. She really makes you believe in Selene's struggle, her internal conflict. And it makes me wonder how her character arc evolves from the first film to evolution. Is she just a continuation of that same Selene? Or is she more complex, more nuanced in this one?
I like that question. I guess we'll have to see how she's changed or not when we watch the movie.
Exactly. Now, what about Michael? What does the review say about his performance?
Well, it uses the word understated to describe Scott Speedman's performance as Michael.
Understated. That's an interesting word choice. What do you make of it? Is that good understated or bad understated?
That's what I was thinking. How do you even interpret understated? It's so vague.
Right. It could mean he's subtle and nuanced, which might work really well for Michael's character, especially if he's meant to be a foil to Selene's more assertive presence,
Yeah, I see what you mean. So maybe understated is actually a good thing in this case.
Maybe. But it does raise a question. How does his performance style, whatever it may be, impact their on-screen dynamic? Especially since the review says their relationship has more depth in this sequel.
So does his understated presence enhance that emotional complexity, or does it create an imbalance?
That's a great question. Maybe his more reserved demeanor helps to ground Selene's intensity, or maybe it creates a disconnect between them.
It's definitely something to pay attention to when we watch the movie. We'll have to see how their chemistry plays out on screen. Now let's shift gears and talk about something I always get excited about. The visuals.
Oh, yes, the visuals. What does the review say about those?
It raves about the cinematography, saying the film has this really cool, dark, Gothic aesthetic.
I love that Gothic aesthetic. It's like classic vampire vibes.
Totally. And you know what else I love? The review's description of the color palette.
What colors are we talking about?
Lots of icy blues and grays, like think winter, moonlight, shadows, that kind of vibe.
Ooh, I can already picture it. It sounds like the filmmakers really nailed the mood with those choices.
Right. And it totally contributes to that signature Underworld atmosphere, you know? It's like those color choices are telling you, this is a world of shadows and secrets.
Enter at your own risk.
Exactly. But it's not just the visuals that are creating that atmosphere, right? The review also mentions the sound design and music being top-notch. And as a huge fan of industrial rock, I've got to say, I'm pretty excited about this.
Industrial rock. Now that's interesting. Not your typical vampire movie soundtrack.
Right. It's definitely a departure from the more traditional orchestral scores you often hear in these types of films.
So what does that musical choice tell you about the film's identity? How do you think it contributes to the overall tone and feel of the movie?
I think it adds a layer of grit and intensity, you know? It's not your grandma's vampire movie, that's for sure.
Right.
And think about how that industrial sound with its hard-driving rhythms and distorted textures plays against those elegant Gothic visuals. It's such a cool contrast.
You're right. It's like a collision of old and new, classic and modern. It definitely makes me curious to hear how it all comes together.
Me too. Now, let's talk about something that's a little less universally praised. The special effects.
Uh-oh. What's the verdict on those?
The review calls them a mixed bag.
Mixed bag. What does that even mean?
Well, apparently the practical effects get a thumbs up, but the CGI, not so much.
So the practical effects are cool, the CGI is not. Got it. Why do you think that is?
I think it has a lot to do with when the movie was made. This film came out in 2006, and CGI technology was in a very different place back then.
Ah, so what might have seemed cutting edge at the time might look a little dated today. It happens. Technology moves so fast. Do you think that dated CGI detracts from the overall viewing experience?
That's a good question. And you know what? It probably depends on your personal tolerance for those kinds of things.
That's fair. Some people are more sensitive to dated special effects than others. It's all about personal preference.
Exactly. Speaking of personal preferences, the review points out that director Len Wiseman seems to favor style over substance. Is that inherently a bad thing, though?
Style over substance. That's a loaded phrase, isn't it?
Mm.
What do you think it means in the context of this film?
I'm honestly not sure. It's got me wondering, is that inherently a bad thing?
Not necessarily. It's more about recognizing different directorial approaches, I think.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So it's not necessarily a criticism, it's just an observation about Wiseman's style.
Right. Some directors are all about visual storytelling. They prioritize stunning visuals and atmosphere.
Okay, yeah. And others focus on nuanced narratives and deep character development.
Exactly. So maybe Wiseman falls more into the former category, which could explain why some aspects of the plot or characters feel a bit underdeveloped.
I see where you're going with this. So maybe he's prioritizing the spectacle over the deeper stuff.
Possibly. But it really begs the question, what do you prioritize when watching a movie like this? Are you more drawn to the spectacle, or do you crave a story that digs deeper into the characters and themes?
That's a really good question. I think for me, it depends on the movie. Sometimes I just want to be blown away by visuals and action. Other times I want something that really makes me think. What about you?
I think I lean more towards the character-driven stories, but I can definitely appreciate a good visual spectacle too.
Totally. Now, speaking of things that might make you think a little bit more, the review does list a few criticisms of the film. Apparently, the plot can feel overloaded, character development, especially for the supporting cast, is limited, and we've already discussed the CGI.
So it's not a perfect movie then. No movie is, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But are those criticisms deal breakers? Or can you overlook them if the film delivers on other fronts?
That's what we're going to figure out.
I'm game. Let's break down these criticisms and see what's what.
Let's do it.
So, first up, the overloaded plot. What makes a plot overloaded anyway?
Well, in this case, the review suggests there might be just too much going on.
So maybe they're trying to cram in too much mythology, too many characters, too many subplots.
It's possible, and that can make it hard to follow the main story thread. But here's the thing, an overloaded plot isn't always a bad thing. It's all about perspective, right?
Right. For some viewers, a complex, layered plot is a good thing. It keeps them engaged, gives them more to think about. But for others, it can be a turnoff, too confusing or overwhelming.
Exactly. It's like some people love those thousand-piece puzzles, while others prefer something a bit simpler. But let's move on to the next criticism, which is the limited character development. The review specifically mentions the supporting cast not getting enough attention.
Yeah, that can be a problem. If you don't care about the characters, it's hard to get invested in the story. Why do you think the supporting characters might be underdeveloped in this film?
Well, maybe it's because the main plot is so overloaded that there's just not enough time to give those supporting characters the attention they deserve.
That makes sense. It's like there's only so much screen time to go around, and if the main plot is hogging all the attention, the supporting characters might get shortchanged.
Right. And then there's the CGI, which we've already discussed. So we've got those three criticisms: overloaded plot, limited character development, and dated CGI. But hey, even with those potential drawbacks, the review does call out a few key elements that might just be right up your alley.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me what I should be looking forward to.
Well, first of all, the review raves about Kate Beckinsale's performance, calling it the backbone of the film.
We already talked about how amazing Beckinsale is as Selene, so that's no surprise.
Right, and of course it wouldn't be an Underworld movie without some epic action sequences. The review says those definitely deliver on all fronts.
All right, so we've got a strong female lead and some kick-ass action. What else?
Well, for those who love lore, it seems Evolution really expands on the mythology of this universe, going deeper into the history of the vampires and Lycans.
So if you're a fan of world building and backstory, this movie might just be your jam.
Exactly. So it sounds like there's a lot to appreciate here, even with those criticisms in mind. But what's the final verdict? What score does the review give Underworld? Evolution.
Drum roll, please. It gets a 7 out of 10.
A 7 out of 10. So a solid, entertaining watch, but not necessarily a masterpiece. What do you think?
I think that's a fair assessment based on what we've discussed. It sounds like the movie delivers on the action, the visuals, and the expansion of the lore, but it might leave you wanting more in terms of plot clarity and character depth.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the question?
We've spent a lot of time analyzing the review's perspective on Underworld, Evolution, but what about your perspective? What are you most excited to see or rewatch in this film?
Ooh, that's a great question. Are you eager to see how Selene and Michael's relationship develops? Or maybe you're excited to dive deeper into the lore and history of the vampires and Lycans.
Perhaps you're simply looking forward to those epic action sequences and the visual spectacle of the film. Whatever it is that draws you to Underworld, Evolution, we encourage you to watch it with a critical eye and an open mind.
And most importantly, have fun. Because at the end of the day, movies are meant to entertain us, to transport us to other worlds, and to spark our imaginations.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover something new about yourself or the world around you in the process. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.